grew up in the church. I was one of those families that was, if the church doors were open, we were there. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, we were there. If the church had something going on, me and my family were there. I grew up in a small little town right down the road from here, not too far, called Las Vegas, Nevada. And growing up in Las Vegas in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the town was booming. When I was born in 1978, the town of Las Vegas had a population of about 250,000 people. When I left Las Vegas for good as an adult, it was about 2.5 million people. And because of all of that growth over the course of my life, I went to a different school every year from 3rd grade until my senior year of high school. And only moved one time in that entire period. They just kept building new schools as the city was growing and expanding. They kept rezoning, and so they kept changing us and moving us around. And because of all this growth, and because of all this movement, and because of all this change from school to school, my friends were constantly changing. Some of my friends would go with me from school to school, but every year it was starting over someplace new. But the one constant through it all was church. And the one steadfast thing through all of that was Matt Walker. Matthew Walker was my best friend from kindergarten until I graduated from college. Matthew Walker and I did everything together. Matthew wasn't a neighborhood friend. He wasn't a school friend. Matthew was a church friend. In fact, Matthew's family is all from Pocatello, Idaho. And which I guess is not far from here, right? So a couple times a year, Matthew and his family would go to visit their grandparents, and every time they would come back, they would bring this great big box of things that looked like Snickers Easter eggs, you know, the Snickers Christmas trees and eggs, and they were chocolate-covered potatoes. And he would say to me, "You've got to try one of these, they're great." And for years, I would say, "No way." And one day I lost a bet, and I had to eat one. It was phenomenal. It was great. Chocolate-covered, anybody had the chocolate-covered potato thing? You guys, half of you haven't even had that. You need to go to Pocatello, because apparently it's a big deal in Pocatello, Idaho. But Matt was a church friend. Our dads were both elders in our church, which in the independent Christian church that I grew up in, the elder is kind of like the big boss. They're a volunteer position, but they're over the pastor, they're over all of the staff, they're the elders of the church, and our dads were both elders, which meant that we were at the church all the time. And because we were at the church all the time, that church was our Disneyland. We knew every nook and cranny of that church. We knew every secret hiding space. We knew that if you went to the back of the children's wing and then snuck into the women's bathroom, there was a drop ceiling. And if you went into the third to the last stall in the girls' bathroom and you stood up on the seat, and Matt, because he was a year older and quite a bit larger than me, would cup his hands and give me a boost, I could push one of the drop ceiling tiles over, climb up into the ceiling, then reach down, grab him, and pull him up. And inside of that ceiling, our world came alive. We had a secret stash up there, a trash bag that within it we kept 2 black hoodies, flashlights, snacks, backpacks, and a map that we had hand-drawn out that gave our way through all of the nooks and crannies, the crevices, and the ways around that entire building. We could go anywhere in the Central Christian Church in Las Vegas, Nevada that we wanted to, completely undetected, up inside the ceiling of the church, but it was treacherous. If you took one false step off of those beams, you would fall right through the ceiling below you. Some places 40, 50 feet high. But that never happened to us. We would concoct missions up in that ceiling, and we would have adventures that we would talk about for years and years to come. And this Wednesday night, we had a very secret, very important life or death mission. Because you see, Wednesday nights at the Central Christian Church in Las Vegas, Nevada were reserved for the youth and the children's choir. Youth and children's choir, and this year, the youth and children's choir at the Central Christian Church was doing a musical production called Salty and the Psalters. This was a 90-minute musical that told the story of a 6'14" blue hymnal named Salty. Yes, on a baseball team. Now, spoiler alert, The story is about the underdog Psalters, which Salty is their star player, and they win the city championship, basically the World Series of hymnals, I guess. And it's really an underdog story. So we were excited for the auditions that would take place. And so Matthew and I studied hard and diligently. We rehearsed lines together because we were both budding thespians. And we saw this as our big break into the Las Vegas show industry. We gave a rousing audition. And we waited diligently over the weeks to come when we would find out our fates when the lines were given out. The choir director's name was Patty Mark. Patty Mark, it was certifiably proven that Patty Mark was 172 years old. Patty Mark had a wig that was jet black that came halfway down her back. She had bright blue eyeshadow and red lipstick. Lipstick that was so red that sometimes if she was walking down the street, cars would stop thinking that she was a sign. Patty Mark wore a plastic cream-colored back brace over the top of every outfit that she ever wore. And when she got angry, she would tap on that back brace with her long, fake fingernails. Patty also would sing old traditional church hymns at any opportunity that she had. I think she really wanted to be a Vegas showgirl, and so was hoping that someone would walk around the halls of the church and would hear her and audition her for a role. She was our Sunday school teacher. She was also the choir director. And so this night, as we're standing there in the choir room waiting for our lines, we're handed out the scripts. We're looking at all of the roles with hopeful anticipation over the role that we're going to get. I watched as one by one, Patty would call a student forward. She would whisper into their ear and hand them a piece of paper with the assigned role that they'd been given. Jenny Green went up first. Jenny Green stood about 4'6". She had blonde pigtails and blue eyes. She was always bouncy and happy and full of life. She had a big smile on her face, which let me know that she got the lead role. At first, I was a little disappointed as I marked that name off, until I realized that there really weren't that many female parts in the play, and I wasn't really wanting one of those, and so the fact that Jenny got one of the female leads really didn't affect me all that much, so I was okay with that. Then Patty called up Chandler. Chandler was our arch nemesis. Couldn't stand Chandler. Chandler always took first place at Bible Bowl. Chandler always was the first to know the memory verse. And Chandler always got the lead role in the children's and youth musical. And this was long before Friends came out when Chandler was a cool name. Who names their kid Chandler before the late 90s? Couldn't stand this kid. And so he walks up, he gets his piece of paper from Patty Mark, he turns around and looks at us and looks right at me and mouths the words, "Salty," and pumps his fist. I felt my heart begin to crush. All of my hopes and dreams of getting the lead role were shattered in that moment. Until I realized what had happened. The directors didn't want to cover this face with blue felt. Right? Salty, more like sucker. You're going to be hidden behind a costume the whole time. Matt and I sat there on the front row as name after name after name after name got called and crossed off until there were no more names in the cast list. She handed out parts for people that would just be fans in the bleachers. And then she packed up all of her stuff, gave a few taps on her back brace, and told everyone to head into the auditorium for a run-through. Miss Patty, what about us? And she looked right at Matthew and I and said, "You two are going to split the role of right field on the visiting team." This was an unjust tragedy of biblical proportion. Listen, I don't mean to spoil the play for you if you haven't seen it, but the visiting team doesn't win. The story isn't about the visiting team. The story is about this ridiculous 6'12" blue hymnal, which, by the way, come on, live in the 21st century. Nobody uses hymnals at all. Get PowerPoint, right? Do something more technologically advanced. The story wasn't about us, and everybody knows that on the baseball team, the worst player gets put in right field. And you put both of us in right field, we were appalled. And so we made it our mission that we would figure out a way to have a starring role in this show. 6.5 weeks of auditions. 6.5 weekends of pulling all-day rehearsals, dress rehearsals, and then the night came. Opening night of Salty and the Psalters, presented by the Central Christian Church of Las Vegas, Nevada's Children's and Youth Choir under the direction of Patty Mark. The place was packed. At least 17,000 people filled seats, sold out audience ready to take this. The stage had been transformed into what looked like a major league ballpark. The first hour and 36 minutes went by smooth. Everyone played their parts, and then as the script unfolded, the bottom of the ninth, the Psalters are down by 3, bases loaded, 2 outs, and who comes to the plate? The blue hymnal. The announcer in his best Vin Scully voice. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the bottom of the ninth. There's 2 outs. The pitcher goes into his windup. It's a fastball right down the middle. And Salty swings and he makes contact. It's a deep ball. It's going. Oh yeah. We changed the script. We'd spent every Wednesday night after church practicing Matt giving me a boost, cupping his hand and lifting me up. So there, right on the right field wall, he cupped his hands, he boosted me, launched me into the air where I made a home run robbing catch of Gold Glove caliber quality, robbing the home run from Salty and winning the game for the visiting team. I landed on the field, high-fived Matt, we began to run circles around the stage until right there in front of 27,000 people, Patty Mark left her spot on the front pew, marched right up those steps, stood right there tapping her back brace and said, "Young man, what do you think you're doing?" I said, "Miss Patty, the gospel really is an underdog story, isn't it? So really, our rendition was more biblically accurate." She didn't think it was funny. She began to tap harder, and she said, "Boys, the Bible in James chapter 1, verse 22 says, 'Do not merely be hearers of the word and so deceive yourselves, but be doers of the word.' And you boys are not doers of the word. I will be speaking to both of your fathers in elders meeting this evening." And then as she turned and led us off the stage, she began to sing, "What can wash away your sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make you whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus." Thus, our very important secret mission. Matt boosted me up into the drop ceiling. I pulled him up. We put on our black hoodies. We grabbed our mat and our flashlights, and we made our way to the boardroom, where we found an air vent and we listened intently to the conversations taking place down below. What was our fate going to be this evening as those 12 men around that boardroom would decide the future of our lives? Would they excommunicate us? Would they call for an exorcism? After all, Patty had called us a bunch of little demons over and over and over. Or worse yet, would they make us sit apart in Sunday school? But the conversation that we heard last night by the elders was unlike anything that we'd ever heard before and anything that we expected. The elders, including our fathers with the pastor in the room, talked about the need for revival. Attendance was declining. Baptisms were down. Something needed to change. The church needed to feel the Holy Spirit moving. They needed to feel the burn, the fire of God sweeping through this place. We slowly backed away, made our way back to the women's bathroom. It was a few weeks later that the church was hosting a youth and children's lock-in. Now, if you're not familiar with church culture, a lock-in is a thing from the devil that the church has identified and grabbed a hold and tried to mask as a good thing. It's where they take all of the children in the church, they put them in the church building, lock all of the doors, and keep them there overnight. Yeah, they keep middle school boys and girls awake for 24 straight hours with no sleep and try to plan all sorts of activities, and then somewhere around 2 or 3 a.m. they put a movie on in the hopes that everyone will fall asleep. Well, it never happens. The adults all fall asleep, and that's when pandemonium breaks out amongst all the kids that have stayed awake. It's a horrible, horrible thing. But this lock-in was even worse, because on top of them locking all of the children and youth of the Central Christian Church into one building for the evening, they also decided that it would be fun to participate in a program called 30-Hour Famine. Now, 30-Hour Famine was designed to give children an understanding of what it was like to be a starving kid in a third world country, with the hopes of sparking them into a life of mission and service. What they didn't realize is it's a really, really, really bad idea to lock a group of middle school boys at the height of puberty and adolescence in a church building with no sleep and no food for 30 hours. Bad idea. By 10 o'clock, we were starving. By 12 o'clock, we were famished. By 1 o'clock, when they started the movie, we were done. And so we set out on a mission. Find food. Sure, we knew that we weren't supposed to be eating, but this was a life or death situation. In the independent Christian church where I grew up, there are two very, very sacred things. The first is the independent Christian church practices communion every single Sunday, the Holy Eucharist. They pass these trays with little tiny plastic wafers that they call bread and little cups of miniature grape juice that they call communion juice. We're independent Christian, not Episcopals. We use grape juice, not real wine, okay? And the second thing is we practice baptism by immersion. The Central Christian Church in Las Vegas, Nevada is really a marvel of modern architecture. It's in the main sanctuary that seats about 2,500 people. There is a stage that recessed in the back of the stage is a baptistry about 15 feet off of the ground. Now on either side of the baptistry are two storage rooms. One of the storage rooms was jam-packed with everything that they would ever need for Christmas productions or Easter cantatas, but the other one on the far side that you would have to cross the path of the baptistry to get to was completely wide open. And that was our clubhouse. We knew the ways to navigate through the ceilings to drop down into that storage room. And we had everything that we would need, where every Sunday during service we would sit back there and commentate the services like Harry Carey and Bob Euchre. We had one of those beanbag chairs with the armrests built into it. We had a backpack with all kinds of snacks and a transistor radio so that if the Dodgers were playing a day game, we could sit back there and listen. Now, the marvel of architecture about this place is that the walls to the outside of the sanctuary of the storage rooms were made out of this magic felt that you could see out of from inside the storage rooms, but they couldn't see in from out in the sanctuary. So we would go up and make faces of the people, we would mimic the pastor on stage, and no one knew anything different. So we had access to the baptistry. Our goal and mission for this night of this lock-in was to find food, and we knew exactly where we could find it. To do that, we were going to have to gain access to the communion preparation room. Now, the communion preparation room was under strict lock and key. Thankfully, we were children of the 80s. And being children of the 80s, we grew up on first-run episodes of MacGyver. And so I knew if we could simply get into the kitchen with access to the communion preparation room, that I could take out my Velcro wallet, remove my membership card to the Boys and Girls Club, put it into the slot, shimmy it down, and it should pop right open. You're not going to believe it. MacGyver was right. The door swung right open, and there, behold, in front of us, was the most majestic sight that we had ever seen. There were boxes upon boxes upon boxes of these little tiny plastic wafers. We took them by the handful, began stuffing them in our mouths. Now, we knew that this was wrong, okay? But we figured we hadn't yet reached the age of accountability, so what would really happen to us? We just kept stuffing them in our mouths over and over and over, and then we realized all this bread, we were thirsty. That's when we saw it. Shelf after shelf of beautiful gold-rimmed communion trays already prepared for the next morning. We took one, took a sip. Now, I don't know about you, but let's be honest, if you've ever had one of those little communion cups, you always want seconds. One is never enough, but it just never seemed appropriate as the tray is passing by to grab more than one. Well, now we had our chance. We went for 1, 2, 3, a half tray down, a full tray down, and then we realized our folly. Why were we wasting our time with all these little cups when there were full, unopened bottles of Welch's grape juice right in front of us? I handed one to Matt, I grabbed one myself, we cracked the lids, and we began to chug. I got about halfway through, and I don't know if there was some kind of chemical reaction between the plastic wafers and the grape juice, but my stomach started not quite feeling well. So I knew that I was done. The label on the Welch's grape juice says very clearly, refrigerate after opening. And wanting to always be respectful of church property, I made my way out of the communion preparation room to the oversized commercial refrigerator in the kitchen. When I opened the double doors to the refrigerator, my eyes were drawn immediately to the Sam's Club Costco king-size jar of Tabasco sauce that was sitting in the refrigerator. I looked at the Tabasco. I looked at Matt. I looked back at the Tabasco. I looked at Matt. And without saying a word, we both knew what must happen next. We spent the next 2 hours and 13 minutes filling 7,714 little tiny communion jars with a concoction of half Tabasco sauce and half Welch's grape juice. We put it all away to be ready for church in the morning. We closed the door and we made our way out. And who was standing there waiting for us? Chandler. He'd been following us around all night, watching everything that we'd done. Apparently the game of sardines that all of the kids were playing made him claustrophobic. He threatened to rat us out and blow our entire scheme sky high if we didn't let him into our club. Matt and I pondered on what was a worse punishment. And we finally made a deal that if he agreed not to tell about what we'd done, that the next morning during church we would take him back into our secret clubhouse. Well, the next morning was packed. The Central Christian Church in Las Vegas, Nevada hadn't seen an attendance like that since Billy Graham came to town in the mid-'80s. It was packed, standing room only, and the place had an energy like Easter morning, and we had our prime viewing location back in the back storage room. We suffered through the sermon, we lunged through the special music, and then came the moment of service that we've been waiting for, the communion preparation. The elders and servers came out holding those glorious gold-rimmed trays. The choir sang the communion preparation song, and the ushers began to make their way down the aisle as all together 7,040 people took Holy Eucharist together. Some gasped. Some groaned. All spit. The pews in the Central Christian Church saw movement that Sunday morning that would have made the Pentecostals blush. I let out an audible gasp at what I just witnessed. We had just scored the greatest prank in the history of pranks. But then we realized where we were. We needed to get out of here quick because soon all eyes would be looking for us because anything that ever went wrong at the Central Christian Church was blamed on us. Bubble bath in the baptistry, blamed on us. Colored dye in the baptistry, blamed on us. Pulling the fire, blamed on... Now, we'd done all of those things, but they were blamed immediately at us. They never looked at anyone else. So we knew that we needed to escape, and we needed to get out quick. And so we began to make our way from our secret hiding space, and we had to cross the treacherous path of the baptistry. And that's when I had a glorious idea that I was sure was ordained from God. As Chandler was about to make his way across the path, I took both of my hands and shoved him in the back as hard as I could, and he fell face first into the baptistry and began splashing around like a fish out of water. Everyone running up and down the pews turned and gasped and stared and pointed, and I'm standing right in the middle, looking with a goofy look on my face. And that's when I did the only thing that a boy who grew up in the church knew to do. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided. They weren't buying it. We needed to get out of there, and we needed to get out of there quick. Leaving Chandler in the baptistry, Matt and I took off running. He pulled the fire alarm to create a diversion, which sent lights and sirens blaring and the sprinklers going off and showering the entire place. He boosted me up into the ceiling. I pulled him up, and as he was being pulled pulled up, Chandler grabbed a hold of his ankle and came up with him. Now the problem is Chandler had never been up in the ceiling before, and if you remember, I told you that it's very dangerous, and so he took 3 steps soaking wet from his submission into the baptistry, and he slipped and fell and crashed right through the ceiling. He grabbed a hold with both of his arms, holding on for dear life onto a beam, his feet dangling through the drop ceiling, 35 feet above the air, kicking and dangling. I looked at Matt and I said, "We've got to do something, he's going to die." And Matt just started laughing out loud. I said, "What are you doing? This isn't funny. He's going to die. He's going to fall." He just kept laughing so loud that he was crying. Tears were pouring down his face. I said, "Is this some kind of reaction? What's going on?" He said, "No, no, no. He's a chandelier." Later that evening, as we sat in the boardroom with the 12 elders around the table, our pastor and Miss Patty, the chairman of the elders said, "Tony, do you have an explanation for yourself?" I pushed my chair away from the table and I stood up and I said, "Gentlemen, ladies, Patty Mark told us our memory verse was James chapter 1, verse 22. Do not merely be hearers of the word, but be doers of the word. We heard you say that this church was in need of revival. And this morning, the baptism was hopping better than it has in months. And all 7,000 people that call this church home sure felt the burn of something." Thank you guys so much.